The next major point in Australia's democratic history was federation. In 1901, the states combined to form the Federation of Australia. Australia was now a nation based on a national constitution signed here in Centennial Park, and Australia was seen as one of the most progressive democracies in the world. On arrival back in Sydney, I interviewed Associate Professor Helen Irving from Sydney University Law School about the Australian Constitution.
Well, the Australian Constitution is democratic in parts and democratic in its spirit, in its vibe, if you like, but still it falls short on a number of measures. One has to look at the difference between the text of the Constitution and the constitutional conventions or practices which lie between the lines. A lot of the Australian Constitution is unwritten. A lot of it is also written in rather sort of mystifying fictions which relate to British practice and British traditions, which are not supposed to be written down because Britain hasn't got a written constitution, and so it's actually a little bit of a dog's breakfast when you look at it. But there are some, we can certainly identify some clearly democratic provisions in the Constitution, and we can acknowledge that historically the Constitution was state-of-the-art democratic constitution in its time. In 1901 it was, I think one can assert with confidence, the most democratic constitution in the world at the time.
But just like ancient Greek democracy, certain groups were excluded from voting.
The first Commonwealth Franchise Act enfranchised all white women around Australia. In New South Wales, the Parliament at the same time in 1902 enfranchised its women. Queensland followed, I think, the following year, Tasmania as well soon after, but Victoria was the state that lagged behind, and its women didn't get the right to vote for state elections until 1908, although they'd been exercising the right to vote for Commonwealth elections for several years by then.
All women gained the vote within a few years of federation, but the Aboriginal people had to wait for over 60 years.
In the 1890s, in the colonies, in 4 out of the 6 colonies, Aboriginal people were entitled to vote. Only 2 out of the 6 colonies, Western Australia and Queensland, had race-based disqualifications. And in Western Australia, the racial disqualification could be overcome by a person holding property worth a certain level, of certain value. So conceivably, some Aboriginal people who were property holders might have been qualified to vote in Western Australia, but across the board, pretty well, you're looking at a racial disqualification. Not just Aboriginal people, but coloured people generally. Same in Queensland.